right, good. Right, so alcohol. Alcohol data seems to be kind of confusing as to what, when, and how health benefits emerge from drinking alcohol. My sense is that, like most things, there's a big it depends. So that's kind of the consensus that I kind of go with. Anyway, some humor. Obviously, we're during the coronavirus, and just thought this was kind of funny because a lot of us do think of Corona as the beer, not necessarily the virus. Up until this year, maybe from now on, we'll think about the virus and the pandemic. All right, so we have a couple different types of alcohol. We have ethanol and then methanol. So two of these you could sort of drink and get away with, and one you definitely do not want to. And in this case, the one that you don't want to drink for sure is the methanol. Methyl is actually wood alcohol, so this is what you use to start fires, something from burning. We have isopropyl. Isopropyl, obviously, that's the top one. This one right here. This is what you have in your cabinet. Probably some pieces of this is included in the hand sanitizer that we're all trying to have with us at all times. And then we have ethyl, which is also ethanol alcohol, and this is the alcohol that people drink. If you've been following the news stories, you probably have seen that some distilleries are actually using their, I guess, the machineries, their ability to, instead of producing alcohol, they're trying to produce some hand sanitation liquids. I don't know if they call them hand sanitizers, but they're. All right, so again, isopropyl, probably not want to drink it. Definitely don't want to drink this one. And then the other ones, again, are pretty common. So why do we consume alcohol? How did it start? How did it become such a normalized thing? Well, the thing is that alcohol is actually a substance that happens naturally in our world. There are many different societies that are ancient that have utilized alcohol for many, many years. Basically, there was even a point in time where it was almost safer to drink alcohol than it was to drink water, and this was mostly because of the lack of having water that was not contaminated. So in some early times where a lot of the kind of bigger metropolitan areas created, there was a lot of waste and not a lot of technology and kind of awareness that water could be poisoned or carrying a lot of toxins and parasites that were unhealthy. So during these times, it was actually better or safer to drink alcohol than water. So fermentation, I'm just going to skip through this. You probably all know a little bit about it. Basically, there is a process where you get some kind of a yeast, usually from a fruit or something. Now, the key thing to remember is that when you're using this fermentation process, you can only create alcohol that is about 15% proof. So the reason behind that is that once the alcohol gets at a higher level, it actually starts to kill off the yeast. So then no more alcohol can be produced. And so this is why we also have things such as distillation and some of the other methods of making spirits and and wine, for example. So in terms of beer, which gets solely fermented, this is why it's usually hangs around in the 8 to 10 to 12% alcohol levels. It doesn't go any higher than that because literally you just cannot get it to go higher without using a different process such as distillation. So when you kind of think about alcohol, what do you think came first? You can kind of ask yourself that. Well, for a while it was kind of thought that wine came first, but actually that's been debated. So now there's kind of more proof that says they both kind of developed at the same time. So just again quickly, so distillation happens very similar to fermentation, where you have the same sugary substance. However, then they go through this process where they vaporize everything and then they cool it. And what is left after the cooling happens is a much more higher concentrated alcohol beverage. So this would be vodka. All right, so some of the history. So overall, the people who were going to have the first brewery were the Egyptians. Like many other things, medicines, use of different drugs, Egyptians were kind of in the front runners for having this type of science. So I'll let you review the history in the last two slides. However, one thing to also, I guess, to do know for the exam is that overall we have actually seen a decrease in alcohol use since the early 1980s, 1979 about. Um, this has probably been more so because we're now aware of all the issues that come with alcohol. So routes of administration, obviously the most common route is oral. In 2004, there was this random company that tried to vaporize it. I really have no idea why. Okay, they just thought it was a cool thing. I guess it was a method of selling some new thing. I don't know. But it was actually banned pretty quickly. So some of the issues with that was that obviously if you get stuff into your lungs, that's problematic. You don't really want to get stuff into your lungs that shouldn't be there. And secondly is that since it eliminated some of the main routes of digested and metabolism, it actually would really go into your system readily, pretty quickly. And that can be an issue, obviously, if you can have some alcohol poisoning and things like that. So in terms of how fast it gets metabolized, we have what we call the first pass metabolism, and this is what happens in the liver and the stomach. So there's a lot of things that factor into how quickly or how effectively this happens. First is obviously the stomach condition, so whether it's empty or whether you just had a burger is going to be different. Concentration of the alcohol, beer versus distilled spirits, there's going to be some differences there. And obviously the beverage makeup. So whether you're drinking something just on the rocks versus something mixed with like soda and stuff is going to also influence how it gets metabolized. And then obviously the health of your liver. Liver is a big player in how well our body metabolizes the alcohol, so having a healthy liver is very important. Just to go back here, about 90% of this happens in the liver. So in terms of metabolism, absorption is actually also different. So beer is pretty slow, and spirits such as vodka and gin are a lot faster. So this is also why people get drunk a lot faster on spirits. Not only is it heavier on the alcohol concentration, but it actually gets into your system a lot faster. Some unknown things: about 5% of the alcohol that we take is actually exhaled. We have a good 20%, sometimes a little bit less than that, that is stomach only, and then the rest again goes into our liver. Now, a thing that I wanted to highlight was this thing called the microsomal ethanol oxidation, and this is basically a separate metabolism system that specifically targets the breakup of alcohol. And about 5 to 10% of this happens with the system. And this is influenced by this enzyme that we all have called the alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. So for the test, do know how this system works, and I'm going to explain it in the next slide. So about, again, 5 to 10% of the alcohol gets digested with a specific system that takes care of alcohol. Okay, so in this case we have alcohol, and we have this enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, which converts alcohol into acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is a chemical component that kind of hangs out in our body for a while, and this specific component is actually kind of toxic. So when we have some symptoms of having like headaches, nausea, feeling kind of sick, it's usually because the alcohol has been transformed into this acetaldehyde. So it's having this acetaldehyde toxicity in our system. So having a lot of this, again, that's where kind of some of those symptoms of having like the hangover come in. There's a separate and different kind of enzyme called acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. So there's alcohol dehydrogenase and acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. And this one's responsible to breaking acetaldehyde down further into acetic acid and then some of the other leftover components such as carbon and water and energy. So again, right here, this is where we have the symptoms of feeling sick. Okay, and this is also explains why some people have very long hangovers and some people do not. Why some people have very intense hangovers and some people do not, because the variation of how much enzymes we have is largely variant. So for example, women have less of this enzyme. There's certain ethnic groups that also have less of this. Some Asian groups tend to have lower acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. So again, their reaction to alcohol is going to be a lot stronger. They're going to have a lot more of those negative, like flushing, nausea, headaches, vomiting kind of influences. So a lot of the genetic differences in how we react to alcohol is basically based on the variation of acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. So do know how to explain that for the test. I probably will be asking you about the metabolism of alcohol, specifically this microsomal ethanol oxidization. So how does that happen? How much of it? So again, about 5 to 10%. And then which are the big enzyme players? So alcohol dehydrogenase, acetaldehyde dehydrogenase, and then the reaction of oxygen at the end. Second thing that to know about alcohol is that alcohol's metabolism is very time limited. So basically, no matter how much you have, you're still going to only metabolize a certain amount of amount in general. So it doesn't go up and down. For some other drugs, sometimes our body can metabolize it a lot faster in the beginning and then slows down as more and more of the drug leaves our body. But this is not the case for alcohol. Okay, so alcohol, it's just a constant rate limited sort of metabolization of it. So overall, the effects of alcohol in the body, they do influence a lot of our neurotransmitters, specifically the serotonin, and then which inadvertently then impacts dopamine. So it doesn't necessarily influence dopamine like cocaine and amphetamines, but it does sort of stimulate the activation of serotonin, and that triggers more of the dopamine, which is again why some people experience the buzz or the feeling intoxicated as being kind of happy. It's not necessarily that they're having the same kind of high, but they're feeling kind of relaxed. There's also some inhibition of some receptors, the MDMA receptors. This is one of the reasons why alcohol blackouts also reduce our memory, and some people can't really remember some of the night when they're highly intoxicated. So it's basically the workings of this glutamate. So having glutamate being inhibited is problematic. It also acts on GABA, and it does a little bit of this opioid endorphins kind of rise, which again is one of the reasons why when people are often drunk, they might not necessarily feel pain. Some of the behavioral inhibitions, obviously our perceptual abilities change, which is why people should not drink and drive. You cannot calculate the same amount of things as you do as when you're sober. Motor movement is a lot more jerky, so it does impact that back of our brain, the stem, which is also why people puke hungover, again, the same kind of vomiting kind of system. And decision making, if your perceptual abilities are kind of faulty, your motor movement is kind of messed up, obviously your decision making might not be the best. And then reaction time, which is also, again, problematic for driving or doing other kinds of things that could put people in danger. One key thing is that it does actually increase our sociability and it reduces our inhibitions. So if people who are often considering themselves as being introverts or maybe shy might actually be a little bit more social. There's this funny kind of phenomena that some researchers have called the closing time phenomena, which is where they basically asked individuals around a bar like how attractive they would find other people. And what they found was that the closer it was to that 2 to 4 a.m., depending on the city time, that the more that they found people attractive. So 8 o'clock, they were 10 o'clock, they were a little bit better looking. By 1 o'clock, everybody seemed like a potential good mate. Funny phenomena that I think. And this is the other kind of thing that I do want you to remember. So there are a couple reasons why we have hangovers. So one theory is that it's a mini withdrawal. So basically your body kind of adapts to alcohol, and then when you stop drinking it, it kind of messes your sort of quick new normal. Acetaldehyde toxicity is kind of the most supported one. So again, having too much acetaldehyde in our system really is toxic. So it turns into nausea, it turns into feeling dizzy, it turns into heart rate issues and things like that. And then the last two, one of them has to do with what's included in the beverage. So often a lot of these alcoholic drinks include sugar, they include carbonated water, and that actually makes it worse many times. And then the final is that often people who are drinking are just not drinking other liquids, so they are getting dehydrated. So if you were to experience dehydration, again, sober without any alcohol, you would still actually have very similar symptoms. Overall, the biological reason is mainly this, the acetaldehyde toxicity, and then everything else is kind of just an added factor component. Well, that is it for now. So the rest of them, make sure to review them yourself. Do know what the St. Bernard myth is. Say no to the dog. That's not good. Alcohol does not make you actually warmer. It just makes you think you're warmer. It actually makes you lose heat, so that's not good. And some of the other combinations.